Very good evening to all. This side Ruby Ahuja, and today we are going to discuss about gold market fluctuation and देखेंगे कि कैसे कैसे न्यूज़ेस और क्या क्या डेटास देखने को मिल रहा है. बट डिस्कस करने से पहले फर्स्ट ऑफ ऑल लेट मी नो आप लोग को मेरी आवाज़ क्लियर है और स्क्रीन प्रॉपर्ली विजिबल है. इफ़ यस काइंडली प्रेस 1 ताकि हम लोग आज का सेशन यहाँ से स्टार्ट कर सके और डिस्कस कर सके सारी की सारी चीज़ें. प्रेस 1 अगर आप लोग को सारी चीज़ें क्लियर हो रही हैं, मेरी स्क्रीन और मेरी आवाज़. सो हम लोग गोल्ड का मूव देख रहे हैं. गोल्ड हमारा 17, 49, 48 के आसपास मूव करते हुए वन डे कैंडल की बात करें तो लगातार 3 ग्रीन कैंडल के बाद वापस एक बार रेड कैंडल के साथ मूवमेंट दिखाते हुए 48.9798 के लेवल्स पे मूव करते हुए फिलहाल गोल्ड हम लोग को देखने को मिल रहा है. सो हम लोग डिस्कस करेंगे सारी चीज़ें. उसके पहले हम लोग आज सबसे पहले एक क्लिप देखने जा रहे हैं जो कि हमारी होगी गोल्ड न्यूज़ kitco.com की. सबसे पहले हम लोग इस न्यूज़ को
We're talking all things silver today with Steve Penny. He is the publisher of the Silver Chartist Report. Steve, welcome to the show.
You bet, David. Thank you so much. I've been following you guys for a long time. First time guest, but a long time listener. So it's a pleasure to speak with you today. Thank you.
That's amazing. Thank you for being here. And I followed you on Twitter. You've got some amazing posts. And we'll be talking about some of your research today. Focusing on silver, I know you cover the uranium and gold markets as well, but today primarily we'll be talking about silver and your outlook for the metal. Silver has had a rough year, to say the least. A lot of people expected it to go higher for a variety of reasons. One of the interesting things I've noticed this year, well, myself and other analysts I've spoken to, is that silver has diverged from the gold price. Historically, they've moved in tandem. Silver has had a higher beta to gold, but this year, for some reason, if you look at the two variables next to each other, they don't seem to be moving in the same direction all the time. Why is that?
Well, I would not necessarily agree with that over the long term. You could certainly, that's certainly a true statement over the last few months. But if you look at the gold to silver ratio, something I track very closely, going back to March of 2020, that ratio had reached an extreme that's never been seen before, about 130 to 1. And then very quickly, that ratio compressed down to about 65 to 1 in August of last year. So that ratio had moved really far, really fast. So I think what we're seeing here is just kind of a little bit of a backing and filling in that ratio, where we said last I checked somewhere around 75 to 1 or so. But I do think that silver will continue to move in the same direction as gold and outperform gold as the bull market resumes.
Okay, and let's talk about the gold-silver ratio now. So, as you said, historic levels, never before seen before. We've come back down since 120, 130. Historically, it's hovered around, I would say, 50. Now we're still higher than that. What's your outlook for the gold-silver ratio? Where should it be according to your analysis?
Sure. Well, there's a couple of answers to that. You can look at mining output, and roughly it's roughly a 9 to 1 ratio, where silver is pulled out of the ground roughly 9 times in greater abundance than gold. So that's one ratio you could look at. You could look at a long-term historical ratio, and that's roughly 15 to 1. And 15 to 1 is interesting to me because that's typically where bull markets peak. So back in 1980, at the peak of that bull run, the price of gold was roughly 15 times that of silver. So I think in the fullness of time, in the next few years, we're very likely to see that ratio revisited, 15 to 1. Of course, that's going to take some time because we're sitting at roughly 75 to 1 now. But that would mean that silver outperforms gold by roughly a factor of 5 over the next few years. And I think that's a very logical path forward.
A decline of the gold-silver ratio down to 15 to 1 could imply one of two things. Either silver skyrockets to the moon or gold collapses. Which is more likely?
Well, I don't think gold is going to collapse. I think we've already seen most of the selling here. I'm not necessarily calling a bottom, But I think we're much closer to a bottom than a top in the metals. And like I said, I think silver's going to outperform going forward, but I also think gold will do very well.
Okay, and let's talk about the industrial component of silver. So let's circle back to the fundamentals now. What do you think are the core drivers right now?
Well, for the silver price, you mentioned industrial demand. That's a tailwind. Industrial uses for silver are only increasing, especially with electrical vehicles, solar panels, you name it. There's a lot of things, industrial uses for silver. But that's not my primary investment thesis, and that's the primary investment thesis is based on retail investment demand. If just a small number of general investors say, hey, I want to have exposure to just some silver, there's just not simply enough at today's prices. And historically, that's what drives, the kind of prices silver investors are looking for, north of $50. And
so
I think that is coming. We're just waiting for a catalyst.
Well, silver investors might be wondering, we've had a number of industrial catalysts this year, the infrastructure bill, the long-term greenification of our economy that requires silver in a lot of different applications, industrial applications. So why hasn't the silver price moved this year?
Well, like I said, the industrial demand, that's a tailwind. But what we need to really see the price move is more generalist investors come in, retail demand. And we just haven't quite seen that yet. We do have the Wall Street silver crowd, and there's a constant bid for silver, physical silver. But we're not seeing the generalist investors shift en masse. They're still into, what I call the bubble assets, general equities and things like that. But at some point, they're going to shift. Value investors are going to shift over towards silver. And that's when we're going to see the really explosive moves higher, in my opinion.
Well, we did see the silver squeeze earlier this year from the Wall Street silver crowd. Right. That wasn't enough, you're saying?
Well, it was enough, but it's still a smaller subset of the general investment crowd. Like, you're not seeing silver talked about on Fox Business or CNBC or anything like that. People are going they're chasing momentum. And right now that's in stocks, tech stocks, and other assets. But at some point, that's going to shift. And one metric I like to track is the Dow gold ratio and the Dow to silver ratio. And we need to see the metals start to outperform stocks. And as that starts to happen, that's going to attract a lot of those generalist investors to take their chips off the table in these overvalued assets and cycle into things like silver and uranium and gold.
Okay. Isn't that kind of a chicken and an egg problem now, Steve? I mean, these mainstream media outlets that you mentioned, Fox Business, CNN, CNBC, they're not going to talk about silver or gold for that matter until the price moves. I remember mainstream coverage of gold. It hit a peak last summer when gold also, no pun intended, hit a peak.
Right.
But it doesn't seem like they were covering it before when there was no price action. So yes, we do need to see more mainstream adoption, but mainstream adoption is going to happen at these low volatility price environments. What do you think?
Yeah, that's true. And it's important to know, especially with silver, the price is set by supply and demand of paper contracts set on the commodities exchange, or the COMEX. And historically, the commitment of traders report is a good indicator, not necessarily of nailing the bottom, but of when a bottom is close. And what's interesting is that commitment of traders report in silver has greatly improved over this last few weeks. So we're seeing the banks starting to cover their short positions, and we see smart money posturing for or positioning for the next turn in silver. And I think that's going to be a big catalyst too when the banks start buying.
Why do the banks have short positions to begin with?
Well, that's a really good question. If you ask them, they'll say it's to hedge existing longs and for their clients. But I'm not one of these people who blames every downtick on manipulation. But I think there's a very good case to be made that silver is likely the most manipulated metal on the planet.
Mm-hmm. What do you mean by that? How is it being manipulated?
Well, on the COMEX, you can see that large sell orders come through at very illiquid times, and that's not the price. That's not the behavior of traders who would be looking to maximize profits.
Okay. So can you elaborate on that? They're doing what exactly?
So let's see. I'm trying to think of the most recent example. Like I said, I don't blame every downtick on manipulation.
I understand.
And I didn't intend to open up a can of worms, but if you go back, let's see, a few weeks ago, there was a really sharp sell-off in gold, something like $80, $90. I can't remember the exact date. And that happened at a very illiquid trading time. In the middle of the night before the New York traders are active. If you're a trader looking to get rid of your long positions, that's not how you would get rid of those. You would want to sell gradually into strength or into more liquid markets. That's just one example of how banks can potentially manipulate the paper price lower.
Well, Steve, I mean, that just speaks to the illiquidity of the silver market and the paper contracts and the COMEX altogether. I mean, isn't that the same argument as saying, well, a penny stock is being moved dramatically by, well, one seller selling a bunch of lots
Right.
overnight. But I mean, he may or may not necessarily be manipulating the market. He's just dumping his positions, right? But it's an illiquid market for that penny stock, and so therefore it's moved a lot.
Well, if you let's use that analogy. Let's say you owned a penny stock, you wanted to sell it, and you know it trades on very thin volume. I mean, are you going to try and sell that in off-market hours when you know there's no buyers there? No, you're going to scale out slowly in the most liquid hours. You're not just going to dump it all at once because you know you're not going to get the best price. And I think that's a great analogy for what we see in the silver market frequently.
Okay. So let's go back to the price now. So the price action we've seen over the last couple of months has been, if I can characterize it as being stale, that could I would use that word, but I'd like to get your opinion on how it's performed thus far according to your expectations as a silver analyst.
Yeah, and saying stale, I think that's putting it kindly. Let's just say it's been terrible. It's been just flat out ugly. I mean, if you told me back in August of 2020 that we'd be here in September of 2021 with a 21 handle in silver, most people wouldn't believe you. Almost everything is going up except for, silver and the things that should be going up in this environment. So it's extremely frustrating. And I sympathize with that. But, I'm a contrarian investor. And as a contrarian investor, I like this price action because it gives us time to accumulate. It gives our members a time to accumulate at much more favorable prices. And, if history is any guide, this is not going to last. Silver and gold have a long track record of thriving and prospering in this exact environment that we're seeing right now. Sure, there are still some short-term headwinds as the Fed continues to talk about taper, normalization of interest rates in 2022. Those are short-term headwinds, but from a longer, bigger-term or macro perspective, we know that's not sustainable. Silver and gold always do a full accounting for the expansion of debt-based fiat currency, and I don't think this time will be any different.
If I were new to the market, if I were not yet invested in silver, would you recommend me getting in right now, or do you think I should wait?
Oh, absolutely. I love that question, David, because a lot of people maybe learn about the silver space for the first time and their eyes are open. They realize that, stock market's a bubble, or they come to these conclusions and then they sell everything and pile all in. And I don't think that's a wise move. I think everyone needs to have a plan. And first of all, I think people should decide, hey, I'm new to this space. How much of my portfolio do I want to even allocate to this sector? That's the first question. And then from there, have a plan to accumulate. There's no right or wrong answer, but you could dollar cost average. You could simply wait for a technical reversal. There's nothing wrong with that. Or you could scale in on weakness. But having a plan is the most important thing. But I certainly wouldn't just, hey, I'm new to the sector, put all my money in right now. I don't think that's the wisest way to do it.
And so if I were to invest in silver right now, let's say, what are some of the instruments I could use? What would you recommend me do? Buy physical, buy the paper markets, buy ETFs?
Sure. Yeah, I love that question. So I'm a big advocate for owning physical metal stored outside of the banking system first. I like to say, build your moat before your castle. I think of physical metals as my defense, and then the mining stocks as my offense. And there's different ways to invest in the mining sector. Some are a little bit more high risk, high reward, if you know what you're doing or you have some guidance. But a simple way to do is just to buy the ETF. That's for someone who doesn't want to do any due diligence on individual stocks. There's some okay ETFs out there, but a well-selected basket of individual mining stocks would outperform, in my opinion.
Okay, interesting. And again, if I were a generalist investor who has no experience in the silver market, I may say to you, Steve, I've just taken a look at the long-term chart of silver over the last 40 years or so, and it has not even breached its 1980 peaks yet. So, I mean, this long-term chart, I'm a long-term investor, I'll say to you, Steve, and this long-term chart doesn't really look appealing to me. What's going to be different this time? What's going to be different in this next 40-year cycle?
Yeah, so the person who says that this doesn't look appealing to me, as a contrarian, this does look appealing to me. You just made a really good point. Silver still hasn't even surpassed its 1980 high, and I think that's the only commodity on planet Earth that you can say that about. Silver reached about $50 in 1980, and here we are at 21. So not only are we not above that 1980 high, we're less than half. So, I mean, unless this is some kind of anomaly where this time is different, silver's got much more upside and very little downside compared to any other asset than I can think of.
Okay. Now let's talk about this $50 silver price. I'm going to give you a hypothetical scenario now. Okay. I'm going to say to you, Steve, we're talking about catalyst now. I'll say to you, Steve, next year, silver needs to go to $50. What would you say the catalyst has to be for $50 to happen in 1 year's time? So basically double in a year.
Okay. Well, picking catalysts is tough because there's a million potential catalysts out there, and trying to nail it down to one. But here's one scenario that I think is likely. I try and avoid terms like using words like crash and collapse and things like that. But let's just say the stock market, I think, is due for a 20% pullback. A lot of people might call that a crash. I think if we saw a 20% pullback in the stock market, especially if it happened in a short period of time, that's going to get rid of any taper talk. They're going to stop talking about tightening interest rates over the in 2022, and they would probably reverse course and have more monetary stimulus. Just a 20% pullback in stock market. That could be a significant catalyst for the metals. So that's one potential scenario I'm looking at here over the intermediate term.
What's the relationship between monetary stimulus and the price of the metals?
Absolutely, yeah. Especially silver. Silver responds, has a direct correlation to Fed monetary policy. Easy Fed monetary policy typically results in uptrending prices for the metals. It's as simple as that.
Can you explain why? I mean, what's the connection here? So you've got a bunch of you've got the expansion of the money supply by the central banks. You've got presumably also a lowering of the interest rates because they need to lower interest rates. That's the mechanism with which they purchase bonds through the open markets. And so you've got more money supply, lower interest rates. How does that feed into higher silver prices?
Sure. So two answers to that. First, silver and gold, put simply, are money. They've been money for thousands of years. And when currency is debased, people look to preserve their purchasing power, and silver and gold have historically done that role. So when they're debasing the currency, that makes silver and gold an attractive alternative. And then second, you mentioned interest rates. A lot of people right now put their savings in the bank to earn an interest rate. Well, if the rate of inflation is higher than the interest you're getting by keeping your currency in a bank, well, you're losing purchasing power, which again makes silver and gold a more attractive alternative, especially to big investors.
Okay. I've heard an argument from another analyst talking about silver. Now, I'll just ask you to agree or disagree with this statement here. Now, he said that silver, like you said, used to be a form of money for many, many generations. It may no longer serve that purpose going forward because what silver has done in the past was it's basically provided smaller units of account for gold. Like if you wouldn't go to a baker and buy your bread with an ounce of gold with a small gold coin, but you might do that with silver coins, for example. So it was smaller units of account for gold. Now what we have gold blockchain. We have gold on. We have cryptos coming out based on gold. that has basically infinite divisibility. And so you can pay for your piece of bread using small fractions of that gold blockchain. And so the purpose of silver is no longer there in the future. How would you respond to that?
Yeah, you're about the fourth person to ask me that in the last handful of days, and I believe you're referring to Lobo Tigre. I actually had the pleasure to meet him in person this past weekend, and Lobo is someone I look up to a lot. He's an independent thinker, and I really respect his thoughts. I'm not willing to say I fully agree with that right now. I mean, the last several thousand years are filled with failed attempts to replace silver and gold as money, and nothing has been able to replace it yet. Now, could blockchain take some of the monetary use away from silver? That remains to be seen. But as far as the blockchain uses for gold, there's also plenty of blockchain applications coming to silver as well. So I think I'm not sure I'm willing to buy into that argument yet, though. I think it's a point worth considering. I respect Lobo's thoughts on that.
Let's close on your forecast for the silver price. So I gave you a hypothetical $50 scenario. Let's talk about your more realistic base case for where silver could end up by this year, the end of the year.
Okay, so realistic forecast for this year, I'm going to say $400. I'm just kidding. No, well, I like to say I deal in probabilities, not predictions. So I think we're very close to a bottom here. There still is some downside risk to potentially $18 or $19 silver. I'm not saying that's a probability, but it's a high enough probability that we should be mentally prepared for it. The big number to watch is $30. I think everyone knows that who's been watching the silver price for any length of time. Once we get above 30, I think we do get to $50 fairly quick, probably within a quarter or two, because there's not much resistance between $30 and $50 silver. So I'll say once we get through 30, I think 50 comes pretty quick. Probably not in 2021, but perhaps in the first half of 2022.
Yeah, I've heard that before. So you're basically giving a pretty tight range from now until the end of the year, which is fair. Do you think the probabilities are more highly weighted on the downside or the upside from here? We're at $22 today.
Yes. Yeah, I think downside risk is minimal relative to upside potential for anyone with a 1 to 3 year time horizon. Downside risk is minimal. If you've got a 1 to 3 year time horizon, I think we're squarely in the accumulation zone. Nailing the exact bottom is very difficult. I mean, very few, and nobody can do that consistently. But we can say, hey, we're getting close here. All the fundamentals, the technicals are all starting to line up that we're getting close to a bottom here. And I think this is a great time to start scaling in if you've got that risk tolerance and time horizon.
So more likely than not, we'll hover between the $22 and $30 range by the end of the year.
I think so, yeah. There's been a lot of technical damage inflicted over this past few weeks. That's going to take a little bit of time to repair.
All right, Steve. Pleasure to have you on the show. Welcome to Kitco, and I look forward to speaking with you again. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Really appreciate it.
And thank you for watching Kitco News. I'm David Lin. Don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel.
सेवनटीन 41.42 64 के लेवल्स पे पूरी उम्मीद है एक बार अपस्विंग दिखाते हुए मार्केट अपसाइड देखने को मिलेगी। 1751.7893 और हम लोग की पोजीशन ऑलरेडी प्रॉफिट्स में। थोड़ा सा वेट करेंगे और अपनी पोजीशन को क्लियर करते हुए बनेंगे अच्छे प्रॉफिट्स के साथ 1752 के लेवल्स पे प्राइजेस मूव करते हुए। पूरी उम्मीद करें जल्दी अच्छे प्रॉफिट्स जनरेट होते हुए मिले और हम लोग अपनी पोजीशन को क्लियर करते हुए बने। $1752.4930 अपसाइड स्विंग लेते हुए प्राइजेस 1752.3238। एक बार 1 मिनट कैंडल का मूव देख लेंगे तो 1 मिनट कैंडल पूरी तरीके से अपसाइड मूव करती हुई 7:30 का टाइम और मार्केट एक बार वापस अपसाइड रेस करती है और हम लोग अपनी पोजीशन को यहीं से क्लियर कर लेंगे। तो देख सकते हैं 1753 तक के प्राइजेस दिखाती हुई मिली और हम लोगों ने अपनी पोजीशन को क्लियर कर लिया अच्छे प्रॉफिट्स के साथ। 1751.63 पे अपने 2 कॉन्ट्रैक्ट्स बाय किए। आई होप आप लोगों ने भी प्रॉफिट जनरेट कर लिए होंगे। देख सकते हैं हम लोगों ने प्रॉफिट जनरेट कर लिए। 1751.63 पे अपने 2 कॉन्ट्रैक्ट्स को बाय किया। 1753.20 के लेवल्स पे उनको सेल करके अपनी पोजीशन को क्लियर किया और देख सकते हैं वापस से प्राइजेस थोड़ी सी करेक्शन की ओर आ रहे हैं। हम लोग का प्रॉफिट बहुत अच्छा जनरेट होते हुए दिखा। $314 के प्रॉफिट जनरेट करते हुए हम लोग दिखे हैं मार्केट में। पूरी तरीके से अपसाइड मार्केट इस टाइम पे देखने को मिल रही है। वापस से थोड़े से अपस्विंग 1754 तक के टारगेट्स। पूरी तरीके से अपस्विंग लेती हुई मार्केट एक बार वापस से अपसाइड राइज करती है 1755 तक के टारगेट्स के लिए। देख सकते हैं मैक्स टू मैक्स 1755 और अगर उसको क्रॉस करती है तो 1758 तक के टारगेट्स देखने को मिलेंगे। उससे ज़्यादा की एक्सपेक्टेशन हम लोग नहीं कर रहे अभी मार्केट से। $1753.55 थोड़ी देर मार्केट का मूव देखेंगे उसके बाद आगे की चीज़ें डिस्कस करेंगे। ओके सो देख सकते हैं पूरी तरीके से मार्केट एक बार अपस्विंग लेती हुई रेडी होती है, पूरी तरीके से थोड़ी सी स्टेबल होती हुई दिख रही है अब हमें। हम लोग आ जाते हैं अपनी कुछ चीज़ें डिस्कस करने। तो सबसे पहले हम लोग आएंगे और हम लोग का फॉरेक्स फैक्ट्री डेटा में हम लोग देख सकते हैं आज मंडे मार्केट और कुछ इंपॉर्टेंट न्यूज़ देखने को नहीं मिली। ऑल्दो एक इम्पॉर्टेंट न्यूज़ लीस्ट इम्पॉर्टेंट न्यूज़ बाय द वे वी कैन से, जो कि देखने को मिली फैक्ट्री ऑर्डर्स मंथ टू मंथ, और इसमें हम लोग देख सकते हैं प्रीवियस 0.4%, एक्सपेक्टेशन 1.1%, एक्चुअल ग्रेटर देन फोरकास्ट हमारी करेंसी के लिए स्ट्रांग होते हुए बाय द वे वही रिजल्ट आते हुए दिखे 1.2%, और जिसकी वजह से गोल्ड को करेक्ट होना चाहिए, बट गोल्ड स्टिल अप। कल की बात कर ले तो कल हमारे पास जो डेटा आने वाला है 7:30 बजे, बहुत इंपॉर्टेंट डेटा, जो कि आईएसएम सर्विसेज पीएमआई, इसके पहले ट्रेड बैलेंस और फाइनल सर्विसेज पीएमआई, जो कि इंपॉर्टेंट नहीं है। वेडनेसडे की मार्केट की बात कर ले तो वेडनेसडे 6:45 बहुत ही अच्छे डेटा, जो कि एडीपी नॉन फॉर्म एम्प्लॉयमेंट चेंज। साथ ही थर्सडे की बात करें तो थर्सडे अनएम्प्लॉयमेंट क्लेम्स, और फ्राइडे ले ले तो फ्राइडे हम लोग की बहुत ही इंपॉर्टेंट चेंजेस, जो कि एवरेज अर्ली रिंग्स मंथ टू मंथ एंड नॉन फॉर्म एम्प्लॉयमेंट एंड इसके साथ ही अनएम्प्लॉयमेंट रेट, ये सारे इंपॉर्टेंट डेटास देखने को मिल रहे हैं। आ जाते हैं गोल्ड नेटेनिया.com पे। सो गोल्ड नेटेनिया.com देख सकते हैं प्राइजेस 1755 के लेवल्स पे आते हुए दिख रहे हैं, पूरी तरीके से अपसाइड आते हुए मार्केट 1755। आज की ओपनिंग से 5 पॉइंट्स की गिरावट के साथ बस देखने को मिल रहा है, 0.30% की गिरावट के साथ। आज की रेंज 1746.60 पे लो बनाते हुए 1765.67 का हाई बनाया अभी तक का। ओपनिंग 1759.50, प्रीवियस क्लोज 1760.65। एयर वाइज चेंजेस की बात करें तो 139.5 पॉइंट्स की गिरावट के साथ, दैट इज 7.37% गिरावट के साथ। 52 वीक हाई 1965.55, 52 वीक्स लो 1676.10 के लेवल्स पे। ग्लोबल मार्केट का मूव देख लेते हैं। सो ग्लोबल मार्केट में डो जोन्स 30 आज हमारे नेगेटिव होते हुए, S&P 500 नेगेटिव, बिटकॉइन नेगेटिव, यूरो स्टॉक्स नेगेटिव, इसके साथ यूरो बॉन्ड नेगेटिव, और डेक्स 30 नेगेटिव, निकाई 225 नेगेटिव। निफ्टी 50 आज पॉजिटिव रहा है, 17,691 का अपना क्लोजिंग दिया हुआ है 0.91% की तेजी के साथ। हैंगसेंग नेगेटिव, एसएक्स 200 पॉजिटिव, ब्रेंट क्रूड ऑयल पॉजिटिव, डब्ल्यूटीआई क्रूड पॉजिटिव, यूरो यूएसडी पॉजिटिव, डॉलर इंडेक्स नेगेटिव चलते हुए दिख रहा है 93.77 पे, और गोल्ड हमारा स्पाइक मारते हुए 1756 के लेवल्स पे। सिल्वर स्पॉट अप, और एक बार मूव करते हैं अपने MT4 टर्मिनल पे, तो पूरी तरीके से राइज करते हुए 1756 तक के लेवल्स बनाते हुए गोल्ड हम लोग को देखने को मिल रहा है। 1756 तक के लेवल्स बनते हुए सेवनटीन फिफ्टी सिक्स पूरी तरीके से मार्केट स्पाइक मारती हुई दिख रही है इस टाइम पे। पूरी तरीके से अपसाइड मूव करते हुए 1757 तक के लेवल्स देखते हैं, ये कैंडल कहाँ पे जाके रुकती है। 7 मिनट बाद इस कैंडल की क्लोजिंग का टाइम। पूरी तरीके से मार्केट एक बार अपसाइड स्विंग लेती हुई दिख रही है 1756.60 के लेवल्स पे। सेवनटीन 57 के भी लेवल को ब्रेक करते हुए मार्केट एक बार अपस्विंग दिखाती हुई देखने को मिल रही है 1757.2325। 1758 के लेवल्स बनाते हुए प्राइसेस पूरी तरीके से अपसाइड। 1757 1758 अब हम लोग की उम्मीद कि 1758 का लेवल क्रॉस नहीं करेगी मार्केट। अब करेक्शन दिखाते हुए दिखेगी, थोड़े से डाउन स्विंग देखने को मिलेंगे। सेवनटीन 57.3136 अभी हमारा पूरा फोकस जो होगा प्राइस पे ही होगा। देख सकते हैं पूरी की पूरी बुल ग्रीन कैंडल के साथ 1758 के लेवल्स बनाते हुए कैंडल हम लोग को देखने को मिली है। 2 मिनट बाद इस कैंडल की क्लोजिंग का टाइम देखते हैं, इस कैंडल की क्लोजिंग कहाँ देखने को मिलती है और नेक्स्ट कैंडल की ओपनिंग किस प्राइस पे देख के कहाँ तक के लेवल्स देखने को मिलते हैं। जहां तक उम्मीद है 58 का लेवल्स टच करके अब वापस मार्केट एक बार 55 तक के लेवल्स पे आती हुई दिखेगी। देख सकते हैं एक दूसरी कैंडल फॉर्मेशन 1756.54751 के लेवल्स पे देखने को मिल रही है। उम्मीद हमारी है कि थोड़े से करेक्शन देखने को मिल सकते हैं। 55 तक के लेवल्स एक्सपेक्टेड है। फिफ्टी फाइव तक के लेवल्स मार्केट के रेडार पे। सेवनटीन 55.5759 के लेवल्स पे प्राइजेस मूव करते हैं फिलहाल। देख सकते हैं प्राइजेस 1755.2021 के लेवल्स पे मूव करते हुए। अगर 55 के लेवल को तोड़ते तो 53 52 के लेवल्स वापस के रेडार पे आते हुए दिखेंगे। सेवनटीन 54.4441 के लेवल्स। वापस एक बार अपस्विंग लेते हुए 1756.2122 के लेवल्स पे प्राइजेस मूव करते हुए देखने को मिल रहे हैं। 1756.838. 1757.1322। वापस से एक बुल ग्रीन कैंडल के साथ प्राइसेस वापस से अपसाइड होते हुए दिख रहे हैं हम लोग को। पूरी तरीके से अपस्विंग लेती हुई 1758। लगातार बुल ग्रीन कैंडल्स की फॉर्मेशन देखने को मिल रहा है हम लोग को 7 बजे के बाद से ही। मार्केट ने जितने दिन पूरे दिन भर में लो बनाए, वापस से उतने अपसाइड मूव करती हुई दिखी है और पूरी तरीके से खुद को स्टेबल करती हुई। सेवनटीन सिक्सटी तक के टारगेट्स वापस से मार्केट के रेडार पे हम लोग को देखने को मिल रहे हैं। सेवनटीन सिक्सटी, और अगर इसके लेवल को पार करता है तो 62 तक मैक्स टू मैक्स हम लोग को लेवल्स देखने को मिलेंगे, इससे ज़्यादा के नहीं। और ओपनिंग क्लोजिंग आज की कहीं ना कहीं अपनी ओपनिंग के आसपास ही होती हुई दिखेगी और वापस एक बार हैमर कैंडल बनती हुई दिखेगी हम लोग, जहाँ तक उम्मीद कर रहे हैं हम लोग आज मार्केट से, क्योंकि मार्केट ने वापस एक बार अपस्विंग्स दिखाते हुए बहुत ही अच्छा अपसाइड मूव दिखाया है। एक ही कैंडल पूरी तरीके से 55 से हम लोग 53 तक के लेवल्स बनाते हुए वापस से 61 तक के लेवल्स पे मूव करती है देखने को मिल रही है। 1761.4546 के लेवल्स पे प्राइसेस मूव करते हैं फिलहाल। बुल ग्रीन कैंडल 1762 के भी टारगेट्स को हिट करती हुई सारे के सारे अपने लेवल्स ब्रेक करती हुई देखने को मिल रही है। सेवनटीन 1761.95 1762 के लेवल्स पे प्राइसेस मूव करते हुए पूरी तरीके से अपसाइड। जहां तक उम्मीद है 62 तक के लेवल से वापस से आप एक बार करेक्ट करती हुई दिखेगी। लगातार बुल ग्रीन कैंडल बिना किसी न्यूज के, बिना किसी एनालिसिस के, बिना किसी डेटा पब्लिकेशन के हम लोग को इतने अपसाइड स्विंग देखने को मिल रहा है। 3 मिनट बाद इस कैंडल की भी क्लोजिंग का टाइम हम लोग पूरी तरीके से इस टाइम मार्केट का मूव देखते हैं। हर टाइम मार्केट में ट्रेड करना इज नॉट नेसेसरी एंड नॉट टाइम गुड थिंग। हम लोग को सही टाइम पे ट्रेड करना चाहिए, एक लिमिटेड प्रॉफिट जनरेट करें दैट्स ओके, बट उससे ज़्यादा लॉसेस न जनरेट करने को सोचे। इसीलिए टाइम देख के सही समय पे ही ट्रेड लेना उचित है। हर टाइम हम लोग ट्रेड नहीं ले सकते। पूरी तरीके से मार्केट एक बार अपसाइड मूव करती है अपनी ओपनिंग के आसपास। ओपनिंग अपनी 60 पे दिखाई थी और अभी 62 के लेवल्स पे मूव करती हुई देखने को मिल रही है, पूरी तरीके से ग्रीन कैंडल फॉर्मेशन के साथ। और जैसे कि उम्मीद थी 62 के लेवल से वापस से 60 के लेवल्स पे आते हुए दिखेंगे। एक दूसरी कैंडल फॉर्मेशन 8 बजे का टाइम। और वापस से करेक्शन होती है, जैसे कि हम लोगों ने कहा था 62 के लेवल से वापस से करेक्शन होती दिखेगी। और हम लोग एक और पोजीशन यहाँ से कैरी करेंगे जो कि होगी हमारी शॉर्ट की। तो हम लोगों ने 59 के लेवल से एक पोजीशन कैरी की है जो कि शॉर्ट की है। 1759.18 के लेवल से हम लोगों ने शॉर्टिंग की हुई है। प्राइजेस थोड़े से अपसाइड मूव करते हुए। सेवनटीन सिक्सटीज के लेवल वापस से मार्केट की रेडार पे। वापस से एक बार बुल ग्रीन कैंडल फॉर्मेशन के साथ 1760 1761 के लेवल्स पे प्राइजेस मूव करते हुए अपसाइड रेस करते हुए देखने को मिल रहा है। जहाँ तक मार्केट एक बार वापस से 61 62 के लेवल फॉर्म कर रही है, उम्मीद है ज़्यादा मूव नहीं करेगी। अब हम लोग को थोड़ी सी स्टेबिलिटी, थोड़े से करेक्शन देखने को मिलेंगे और हम लोग की पोजीशन जल्दी ही प्रॉफिट्स में आती हुई दिखेगी। देख सकते हैं 60s के लेवल से वापस से थोड़ी सी करेक्शन 1760.3934 के लेवल्स। हम लोग इस सेक्शन में पूरी तरीके से न्यूज़ के छोड़ के अपने प्राइस को एनालाइज करते हैं और नेक्स्ट सेक्शन में हम लोग पूरी तरीके से न्यूज़ पे काम करते हैं, क्योंकि नेक्स्ट सेक्शन में हम लोग के मार्केट मूव करना थोड़ी सी स्लो कर देती है, जिसके बाद हम लोग अपने न्यूज़ सेक्शन पे आते हैं और डिस्कस करते हैं सारी चीज़ें। सेवनटीन 60.92 के लेवल्स पे फिलहाल प्राइजेस का मूवमेंट। सो हम लोग एक बार मूव करते हैं अपने न्यूज़ सेक्शन की ओर और डिस्कस कर लेते हैं थोड़ा सा न्यूज़ को। और हम लोग आते हैं गोल्ड न्यूज़, एफएक्स स्ट्रीट। So gold news FX Street XAU USD bears target 1739 if 1749 caves in. So gold prices has kicked off the NFP week on wrong footing, challenging the $1750 psychological barrier amid a rebound in the US Treasury yields across the curve. Gold is testing bids at critical support at 1749, which is the convergence of previous low 1 hour, Fibonacci 23.6% 1 month, and Fibonacci 38.2% 1 week. On a sustained move below the latter, the intersection of SMA 100 1 hour and pivot point 1 day S2 and SMA 5 1 day at 1744 could be tested. 1735 will be the level to beat the gold for buyers, which is the confluence of the Fibonacci, which is the confluence of the pivot point 1 day S3 and Fibonacci 61.8% 1 week. On the flip side, strong resistance appears around 1754, where the Fibonacci 23.6% 1 week coincides with SMA 50 1 hour and SMA 10 1 day. The next upside target is seen at 1759, which is the Fibonacci 38.2% 1 day. The previous day's high at 1764 could then challenge the recovery momentum. फंडामेंटल्स की बात कर ले, सो गोल्ड प्राइस हैज किcked off the NFP week on the wrong footing, challenging the 1750 psychological barrier amid a rebound in the US Treasury yields across the curve. Rising inflation expectations calls for a sooner than expected monetary policy tightening by the Fed, lifting the rates on the markets. Meanwhile, the broader market sentiment remains tepid amid China Evergrande uncertainty and fresh US trades jitters limiting the downside in gold price. The US dollar retreat also helped gold price, although light trading could exaggerate moves in the bright metal. सो 1 मंथ की फोरकास्टिंग देख ले तो 1749 पे अभी भी गोल्ड बियरिश मूव दिखाते हुए, और 1 मंथ की बात करें तो 1740 एंड फॉर 1 क्वार्टर इट वुड बी 1733. आ जाते हैं अपने दूसरे डेटा को डिस्कस करने. सो गोल्ड वीकली फोरकास्ट, XAU USD appears sell on bounce ahead of all important NFP. So Thursday's rebound saves the day for gold after a terrible week. Fed's tapering calls, risk of mood underpin the dollar, yields take a breather. XAU USD's technicals are pointing to further downside potential. The FX poll is showing gold is unlikely to take a substantial recovery. Will gold price sustain? The comeback from multi-week trough, the weeks of gold witnessing massive volatility despite limited first tier US macro news. As Fed sentiment and US political drama led the way, an intensifying global energy crisis, the China Evergrande debt issues, and the Fed's tapering fears kept investors on edge. The China's Evergrande debt issue and the Fed's tapering fears kept investors on edge, benefiting the safe haven US dollars at gold's expense. However, the quarter end flows came to the rescue of gold as the price managed to reverse most of its weekly losses, snapping 3 straight weekly declines. Gold in the hindsight. So, in the first half of the week, gold prices heavily suffered and reached 7 week lows at 1722. As the previous week's hawkish shift from the Fed drove the US Treasury yields through the roof while lifting the greenback alongside. Additionally, several appearances by Fed Jerome Powell and speeches from his colleague amplified expectations for sooner than expected tapering as the market began pricing in a rate hike in 2022. The hawkish Fed expectations were reflective of the underlying economic optimism. Further soaring oil and gold prices ramped up inflation expectations, adding to the Fed's tapering calls. US inflation expectations measured by the 10-year break-even inflation rate per the St. Louis Federal Reserve data climbed to the 2 week highs near 2.40 on Tuesday. Meanwhile, the benchmark 10-year Treasury yield rose to 3 month highs of 1.567%, sending the US dollar index to the fresh yearly high near the mid 94. By the midweek, the attention gradually started to drift from the Fed's tapering plan to accelerating tensions over the global energy crisis in the wake of the persistent rise in the gas and oil prices. The euro area and the UK experienced empty pumps, which threatened to shut down factories and derail the economic recovery. Similarly, unprecedented power cuts in China have brought the factories to a halt. Against the background, stagflation worries hit the markets with the risk of moved reviving the demand for the safe haven assets such as the government bond, and the treasuries thereafter corrected sharply from multi-top highs, putting a floor under gold price. The US political drama on the dual fronts also started coming into play in the second half of the week, weighing on investor sentiment and helping the puck maintain its bullish momentum. US Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer said Thursday that lawmakers agreed to extend government funding through December 3, averting an imminent shutdown. Although the debt ceiling in mid October still lurks amid the political wrangling, further, a delay in the House vote on the US President Joe Biden's infrastructure bill spooked investors once again. Boding well for the dollar. Thursday's upward revision of the US final quarter to GDP offset the rise in the jobless claims, pushing the dollar index to fresh yearly tops as gold price held on to its rebound amid the worst week for the US stock since March 2020. गोल्ड वीक अहेड के बारे में बात करेंगे, उसके पहले एक बार आ जाते हैं MT4 टर्मिनल पे। तो वेल डन, gold has crossed all of the limits and has reached at the level of 1761.61 itself. बिना किसी रीजन, बिना किसी डेटा पब्लिशिंग के मार्केट एक बार इतनी ज्यादा अपसाइड आती हुई दिख रही है। पूरे लेवल्स को क्रॉस करते हुए मार्केट एक बार 1766 के लेवल्स पे आती हुई देखने को मिल रही है। देख सकते हैं एक दूसरी कैंडल फॉर्मेशन 1767 के लेवल से अपसाइड, तो जैसे कि उम्मीद है अब एक बार 1770 के टारगेट वापस सेट कर सकती है मार्केट। देख सकते हैं पूरी तरीके से मार्केट एक बार अपस्विंग लेती है 1770 के लेवल्स के आसपास पहुंचते हुए। सेवनटीन 69.47 पूरी तरीके से अपस्विंग दिखाते हुए लगातार मार्केट बुलिश साइन दिखाती हुई देखने को मिल रही है। 7 बजे के बाद से लगातार हम लोग को अपसाइड मूव देखने को मिला है, करेक्शन देखने को मिल ही नहीं रही है, पूरी तरीके से अपस्विंग लगाते हुए मार्केट्स। सेवनटीन 69 के लेवल्स पे मार्केट थोड़ी सी स्टेबल होती हुई, जिस तरीके से स्टेबिलिटी दिखा रही है, पॉसिबल है एक बार डाउन स्विंग दिखाते हुए मिले। सो हम लोग यहाँ से अपनी पोजीशन को बचाने के लिए एक बार वापस अपने दो कॉन्ट्रैक्ट को शॉर्ट कर रहे हैं। 1769.53 के लेवल्स पे हम लोगों ने एक और कॉन्ट्रैक्ट अपना शॉर्ट किया हुआ है। मार्केट 1770 के टारगेट्स बनाती हुई, लेकिन पूरी उम्मीद है एक बार करेक्ट होती हुई दिखेगी 1770 के लेवल से, क्योंकि 1770 एक बहुत अच्छा हर्डल मार्केट के लिए। थोड़े से करेक्शन उम्मीद करें, अच्छे खासे करेक्शन देखने को मिले ताकि हम लोग की पोजीशन अच्छे प्रॉफिट्स में आते हुए दिखे। वापस से 1770 के लेवल्स को ट्रेस करते हुए मार्केट एक बार अपस्विंग दिखाती हुई देखने को मिल रही है। हमारी उम्मीद है 1770 के ऊपर नहीं जाते हुए वापस से एक बार करेक्शन के साथ आती हुई दिखेगी। $1769.6745 के लेवल्स। $1769.6867। देख सकते हैं करेक्शन के साथ हमारी पोजीशन प्रॉफिट्स में आती है। पूरी उम्मीद करें अच्छे खासे प्रॉफिट्स जनरेट होते हुए दिखेंगे इस कैंडल के थ्रू, और नेक्स्ट आने वाली एक दो कैंडल के साथ हम लोग बहुत अच्छे प्रॉफिट्स जनरेट कर चुके होंगे और मोस्ट प्रोबेबली हम लोग की पोजीशन जल्दी क्लियर होती हुई दिखेगी। अभी के लिए अभी इतना ही हम लोग के इस सेशन के लिए। आगे का सेशन डिस्कस करेंगे हम लोग, उसके पहले अगर कोई भी क्वेरी हो तो आप लोग कमेंट सेक्शन में मेंशन कर सकते हैं relating to any trade, any tool, any technique or any news section. You can just mention in the chat box or else type 100 to end with this session right here. वापस से 10 मिनट बाद हम लोग लॉग इन करेंगे और आगे की चीज़ें डिस्कस करेंगे। अगर आप लोग के साइड से कोई भी क्वेरी हो लाइक एनी टूल एनी टेक्निक, देख सकते हैं हमारी पोजीशन बहुत अच्छे प्रॉफिट्स में आती है ऑल दो, और हम लोग अपनी पोजीशन को यहीं पे क्लियर कर लेंगे। हम लोगों ने अपनी एक और पोजीशन क्लियर कर ली है, हमारी दो पोजीशन क्लियर हो चुकी है। एक हम लोगों ने देखी $264 के प्रॉफिट के साथ अभी क्लियर करते हुए, और उसके पहले वाली $314 के साथ क्लियर करते हुए, दोनों ही बहुत अच्छे प्रॉफिट्स में जनरेट होती हुई। तो हम लोग आगे की चीज़ें बाद में डिस्कस करेंगे अपने नेक्स्ट सेशन में। तब तक के लिए थैंक यू सो मच, और वापस से ज्वाइन करेंगे हम लोग 10 मिनट बाद और डिस्कस करेंगे आगे की सारी चीज़ें। तब तक के लिए थैंक यू सो मच फॉर ज्वाइनिंग एंड कंसंट्रेटिंग एंड फॉर योर प्रीशियस टाइम। हम लोग आज का सेशन यहीं पे एंड करते हैं।